Earlier this week, I posted a poll to my channel asking which weapons you would choose between Ace of Spades and Thorn when challenged to a 1v1. And you guys didn't disappoint with 2.6 thousand votes cast. Ace of Spades got 46% of them. And while Ace is still top tier, I don't think it's quite that clear cut. And with tons of people still asking which hand cannon they should be using in the Crucible, it's time I break down Thorn versus the Ace of Spades to help you determine which exotic hand cannon you should be using in your kinetic slot and how both these hand cannons get a place in your loadout. Jumping right into it with these weapons, we have to start with the stat comparison. Starting with Thorn, you can really see where its strength lies in its handling. It's got a whopping 86 handling on this hand cannon. You can also easily see where the weaknesses are. Around the range at 54, which is relatively low for a hand cannon, especially when we start talking about Ace of Spades. And then also that reload speed is going to be painful at 46. So we're definitely going to be looking at utilizing some mods to help boost that reload speed. But great aim assistance, great recoil direction, and a relative, this magazine size is off, is actually 9, so 11 is not accurate. But again, biggest downside of Thorn, you're going to see this come up a lot during the video, is the range. You do have to play within a certain range to really get the most out of this weapon and be very aware of when you're getting outside the effective range of this weapon. Moving on to the Ace of Spades, and here you can see kind of a little bit of opposite scenario here in terms of strengths and weaknesses when it comes to stats. You're looking at a range of 86 here, and a range of 86 is massive on this weapon. Then when we get into Memento Mori, that's only going to help that, but we're going to talk more about that later. But again, kind of the opposite effect here compared to Thorn, much lower handling. So your ADS speed, your swap speed are going to feel a little bit more sluggish on this weapon. It's not going to feel as snappy or reactive. And for some players like myself, that can be a huge downside. Players who value handling really value the snappiness and responsiveness of a weapon, especially if they have quick reaction time. They want weapons to react and respond as quickly as they do, because it really does throw off people's game when a weapon responds slower than they are reacting to a gunfight. As you can see, the reload not great here either. So definitely looking at, again, reloading mods for both of these hand cannons. But on the aim assist front, we are looking at a little bit lower of an aim assist stat, so it may not be as generous when it comes to that stickiness you feel when aiming at targets. But just from a stat perspective, you can really see kind of the yin and yang of these weapons in a sense. You have one that favors extremely high range and less handling, and then the opposite with Thorn with that higher handling stat. Next, we have to talk about the exotic perks on these weapons and the application in game and how they kind of both play out in actual game scenarios. Starting with Ace of Spades and Memento Mori. Reloading after a kill loads magazine with a few extra damage bullets, grants radar while aiming down sights. Now Memento Mori, I think, is pretty well known at this point in the community for being literally one of the best exotic perks in the game. It boosts your damage by a ton, and on top of that, you're also getting that radar. Gives you about 6 bullets to go lay into the enemy team with, and as you get kills, you can be constantly refreshing it after reload. The even more valuable part of this perk, in my opinion, is the grants radar while aiming down sight, and this is not unique to Memento Mori being procced. You will always have your radar while aiming down sights with Ace of Spades, and this is something I've talked a lot about in the past. Ace of Spades is great for people who feel like their awareness is an opportunity in their game, because you're gonna be able to ADS longer or as long as you want basically, and not be able to lose sight of anyone sneaking up behind you or taking advantage of you not having your radar. And so it makes it very great for those type of players that like to lane for a long time. And because of the 86 range stat on Ace of Spades, it does actually help you play into a longer range playstyle and challenge some shorter range pulses with your Ace of Spades, especially when you have Memento Mori procced. So overall with Memento Mori, you're looking at a huge increase in lethality on top of the fact of an awareness piece that is always going to be there, because your radar is going to be always on no matter what, especially for classes like Warlock, which I main, where you can hold down your Rift and ADS without a care, knowing that your radar is always up. And the other part of Ace of Spades' exotic trait is Firefly. Now Firefly on this weapon is nothing really to write home about. Firefly isn't really the best perk for PvP specifically, but it is nice for a little bit of chip damage when enemies are kind of standing close to each other. But is this going to be the trait that really makes or breaks a fight for you? 99% of the time, the answer is probably going to be no. So Firefly, while nice to have, isn't really a game changer on Ace of Spades. It really is all about Memento Mori, that always on radar, and that increased damage and increased damage fall off because of that increased damage. And And then we have Thorn with the exotic perk Mark of the Devourer. Rounds pierce targets and deal damage over time. Kills with this weapon leave behind remnants, and the exotic trait absorbing a remnant strengthens Mark of the Devourer and partially refills the magazine. And so with Thorn, it really is about playing a little bit more aggressive with this weapon. Because of that lower range stat, the amount of space you're going to have to play in where your weapon is going to do optimal damage is a little bit smaller. So you're going to need to push in a little bit more aggressively with this weapon in order to fully take advantage of Mark of the Devourer. When you get those kills and it creates the remnant, you want to be relatively close so you can grab that remnant and get the refill of your magazine, but also the damage boost, where now when you hit headshots, it's gonna do a little bit more damage, and instead of ticking for 1 damage, it's gonna tick for 7 damage. And for enemies under 6 resilience, you're gonna be able to 2 headshot them when Mark of the Devourer is procced, and the rest of the Thorn perk will burn them out, which is just an amazing feeling when you land those 2 headshots and get a kill from that burnout damage. And just in general, the burnout damage of this weapon really helps make it a competitor to Ace of Spades, because of that lack of range really does hurt the Thorn when going against an Ace of Spades if we're doing a direct versus here. And so having that burn damage is nice for delaying recovery and delaying an opponent's time that they can be ready to fight you again because of that delay in recovery. And so that's something, again, with Thorn you really have to be aware of and take advantage of if you're going to use this weapon. And the other piece of this exotic perk, I would say, is it really has a nice snowball effect. If you're constantly getting kills with Thorn and playing aggressive, you're going to be consistently getting Mark of the Devourer procced and getting your hand cannon magazine refilled, which is going to limit how often you're going to have to reload and experience that 46 reload speed. But it makes it to where that Mark of the Devourer is procced very often, and you're going to be constantly doing a ton of damage. And because you're doing that increased damage per shot along with the increased burn damage, it does help compensate for that lower range because your base damage will be higher. So when you do shoot someone from farther, the damage won't be quite as low as if you hadn't had Mark of the Devourer procced. And so that's really the impact or potential of Thorn, is the fact that you can play aggressive, really take advantage of Mark of the Devourer and use it to have this snowball effect where you're constantly getting remnants, refilling your magazine, and chaining a bunch of kills together and absolutely dominating the game. So deciding which one of these weapons should we be using. With Ace of Spades, you have that always on radar, memento mori damage boost, and because of that range, it allows for a much more passive playstyle. You don't have to play as up close and personal. You can play back a little bit more, lane a lot longer because of that always on radar. So you feel a lot safer using the Ace of Spades and taking advantage of Memento Mori and that 86 range on this weapon. For Thorn, you have the burn damage, which puts pressure on your enemies and allows for your ability to follow kind of the damage ticks through walls, to track your enemies briefly through walls. You also have the Remnants and Mark of the Devourer, which allow for a nice snowball effect with kills and that damage boost you get from Mark of the Devourer, and the burn damage to kill enemies after they may have already run away. And the fact that the Remnants also partially refill that smaller magazine, which is a downside on Thorn. And then we have the handling on Thorn, which makes the weapon very responsive and snappy. It makes it nice for pairing with a high handling special weapon. But the downside, the range forces a much more aggressive playstyle with Thorn, and because you have to be constantly picking up those remnants, and you're gonna have to be relatively close to your enemy to take advantage of those before they go away. So with all that being said, it's hard to say that Ace of Spades is not purely the better hand cannon. In almost any mode. It's gonna be great for 1v1 or something like Rumble. It's gonna be great in trials because there's so many advantages just inherently to the Ace of Spades. You could just talk about the always on radar alone, and for some people that's gonna be enough to make them use this weapon. And then you throw in the damage boost and just the flinch that Ace of Spades has, and it's really hard to compete with this weapon. That being said, I'm actually gonna tell you right now why I prefer Thorn over the Ace of Spades, and it is because of that higher handling and how it caters more to my type of play style. I like to have weapons that are very snappy and responsive. I pair them, I use my whole loadout all together, meaning I'm constantly swapping between my Sojourner's Tale and my Thorn. And so the snappier and more responsive a weapon is, that means it's gonna stow faster, and it's gonna allow me to switch between weapons with my Apathettic aspects even faster. On top of the fact that with the burn damage of Thorn, I love the additional pressure it puts on the enemy team and how it helps delay the recovery. This allows me to choose when I really want to be even more aggressive in my playstyle, and once I'm getting that burn damage, I know it's going to be a lot easier for me to get that cleanup kill with my Sojourner's Tale because their recovery is going to be delayed. And also for modes like Trials, Thorn is incredibly useful for delaying those reses. And again, even if they do get the res, they're going to be constantly taking that burn damage, and just puts an overall ton of pressure on the enemy team. And that is why I personally, even though Ace of Spades is the better hand cannon overall, I actually prefer Thorn if maps and things like that are removed from the equation. At the end of the day, both of these weapons are incredibly strong, guys, and I switch between them quite frequently. And depending on the map, I will use Thorn or Ace of Spades. I typically lean towards Ace of Spades when it's a little bit longer of a range map. I'm thinking maps like Bannerfall that have long lanes, where having the range of Ace of Spades is going to be super helpful. But if it's any other map that's a little bit tighter, a little bit more close quarters, I'm going to be running Thorn 100% of the time, just because I prefer the feel of that weapon and I love the pressure the burn damage puts on the enemy team. But let me know in the comments below, between Ace of Spades and Thorn, which do you think is the better hand cannon based on everything we've talked about here today? Overall, you can't go wrong with either of these options in Crucible, as both offer a huge advantage in the kinetic slot. But keep in mind, depending on the scenario, one hand cannon may shine more than the other. If you're looking for a great legendary option in the kinetic slot, check out my video on the Judgment hand cannon at the top, or if you're looking for an insane Warlock stasis build, check out my video at the bottom.